Hello everyone, and welcome to our GOALI webinar series. My name is Heather Holton, and I'll be moderating today's webinar, Professional Geologist Licensure Requirements and the ASBOG National Geology License Examinations. In today's webinar, we will provide an overview of geology licensure qualification requirements in the United States, discuss the national licensing examinations for geologists prepared by ASBOG, and learn how data from the ASBOG Fundamentals of Geology exam can be used as a curriculum assessment and curriculum modification tool. I'd like to take a moment to thank our media partners for promoting today's webinar: the Association of American State Geologists, the Association of Environmental and Engineering Geologists, the American Institute of Professional Geologists, the Environmental and Engineering Geophysical Society, the European Federation of Geologists, the Geological Society of America, the International Association for Geoscience Diversity, the International Association of Hydrogeologists, the U.S. National Chapter, the National Association of State Boards of Geology, and the Society for Sedimentary Geology. Our first speaker is Lori Rocca, who will be giving us an introduction to state licensing of geologists. Lori is a licensed professional geologist with over 25 years of experience working in private environmental and geotechnical consulting, providing regulatory agency oversight of large military and civilian environmental cleanups, and investigating technical negligence and fraud for Cal EPA. She was appointed as a senior registrar for geologists and geophysicists by the California Board for Professional Engineers, Land Surveyors, and Geologists in June of 2015. She also volunteers as the examination committee chair for ASBOG. Next, Jack Warner will discuss the ASBOG Task Analysis Survey. Jack is president of TEST Incorporated, which he established after working in state government for several years. TEST Incorporated has provided ASBOG with psychometric services since 1992. The services include developing test blueprints based on task analysis survey results, developing and updating the FG and PG examinations, conducting test development workshops, analyzing the statistical properties of exam items, grading the exams, establishing cutoff scores, and preparing summary reports that document the performance of the examinations. And finally, Randy Kath will talk about using the ASBOG Fundamentals of Geology exam as an assessment tool for geoscience programs. Randy has been a board member of the Georgia State Board of Registration for Professional Geologists since 2013. He has also served as a subject matter expert on the Council of Examiners for ASBOG since 2006 and was ASBOG's president in 2015. Since 2008, ASBOG has been collecting demographic data on the test form that allows for detailed statistical analysis of the content domain data from the FG exam by university and graduation year. In 2012, Dr. Kath developed an assessment graphing application to streamline the statistical analysis and graphing of the FG exam for assessing university geosciences curriculum performance relative to a national dataset. Assessment data from the FG exam are currently available for more than 215 geoscience departments. Here's an overview of today's schedule. Each speaker will give a 15-minute presentation, followed by 10 minutes of question and answer. Feel free to type your questions into the Q&A panel at any time during the webinar, and I will moderate the discussion during the designated times. Now, I would like to welcome Lori Rocca to give us an introduction to state licensing for geologists. Lori, take it away.
This first presentation in this webinar is designed to answer two questions. What is a professional license, and how do I get one? Please note that licensing is a state-specific function, and this information is intended to be a 30,000-foot overview of geology licensing in the United States. For the specifics regarding geology licensing in your state, you should contact your state's licensing board. We'll start out with a review of the basics. Much of the confusion regarding geology licensure is due in large part to the misuse of terminology. Because of this, the purpose and therefore the importance of professional licensing is often misunderstood. Once we're all on the same page with the terminology and purpose of licensing, I'll provide a general overview of the requirements to qualify for a license. And for geology professors and those who mentor students or young professionals, I'll provide some information on how licensing influences career pathways. When talking to colleagues, geoscientists tend to use terms with very specific legal and technical meanings. Very often, these terms are used loosely or incorrectly without bothering to understand their very specific legal or technical definitions. Registration is the creation of a list, students in a class, members of a club. Certification is the comparison of something to an established standard, such as comparing coursework to the requirements for a college diploma. And I think we all understand what licensure is because we all drive a car. Licensure is the government's permission for you to do something. Many states use the older terminology registered, likely because the early licensure states used that terminology. In California, the second state to license geologists, registered was originally used because the board published a paper registry of licensed geologists. The terminology in California was eventually modernized to make it clear that we license professional geologists. A professional license encompasses both certification, where a person's qualifications for a PG license are evaluated using criteria defined by law, and registration or issuance of a license number. Earning a professional license is about measurable criteria defined in law and regulation, applied fairly, applied consistently, and subject to an appeal process heard before a judge in court. Coincidentally, I just spent several hours on the witness stand in court yesterday explaining to a judge why I denied someone's application for a license. As a representative of a government, I must be able to substantiate that my decisions about someone's license application comply with the law and with the regulations in my state. It is this binding force of law, that governmental permission, which makes a license unique. One of the biggest misunderstandings that many professionals seem to hold is that a licensing board represents the geologic profession. It does not. A licensing board represents and protects the public. A state licensing board regulates the profession of geology. Professional societies such as AEG, AIPG, and GSA are valuable and important organizations that represent the geologic profession and are dedicated to promoting service to society as well as professional ethics and continual learning. However, as representatives of their profession, their purpose is very different as compared to a governmental body representing the public interest. I tell college students to think of professional societies such as AEG as their professional coaches. Just like a professional football coach, a professional society is there to assist professionals to continuously challenge themselves to become better. On the other hand, a state licensing board is like the referee. License boards are there to monitor compliance with the rules of the game, otherwise known as the laws and regulations. If a professional geologist commits a violation, just like the referee, we can assess penalties, fines, and revoke licenses. Suggesting that a professional society be in charge of professional licensure is setting up an inherent conflict of interest. A professional society cannot adequately serve the interests of the public while at the same time promoting the profession. This is a critical difference between a professional society's certification and a state-issued professional license. Large-scale disasters, due to geologic hazards or man-made environmental hazards, are often the reason for initiating licensure of geologists. Occurrence of these hazards on one property may have consequences to neighbors, to taxpayers in the form of infrastructure or other repairs, and to society in terms of economic disruption, public safety issues, or even lives lost. Earthquakes, landslides, dam failures, groundwater contamination. The disasters with a big D are often what get the attention of policymakers. However, we shouldn't forget the smaller little d disasters. The rancher who spends $50,000 drilling a water supply well where the water witcher tells him to, only to come up with a dry hole and more expenses. The homeowner with sewage backing up into their living room because of a septic system design based on an incorrect understanding of site geology and soils. Big D and little d disasters are equally important to those who experience them. These are legitimate and compelling reasons for licensing the geologic profession. Many geologists hold the incorrect belief that licensing is about professional stature and benefiting a profession. The purpose of licensing is quite simply to protect the public by enforcing minimum standards for competency. I often use another sports analogy when explaining this concept to students. A professional license is like a professional golf association tour card. It doesn't mean that you are one of the best like Tiger Woods. It simply means that you've met the minimum standards required to play the game. While a license is required by law for many careers, it should be noted that not all geology careers require a license. For example, licensing is a state function that can't be imposed on the federal government. So while employees of the California Geological Survey are subject to licensing requirements, employees of the United States Geological Survey are not. However, having a professional license increases career opportunity and flexibility. For example, a geologist working for US EPA may get laid off due to the policies of a particular presidential administration. When looking for new employment, many jobs will not be available to that laid-off federal worker because those jobs require a professional license. Additionally, getting a professional license demonstrates a commitment to being personally and legally responsible for your own technical work and those working under your responsible charge. It lets everyone know that you are committed to upholding the standards of practice for your profession. As I mentioned earlier, licensing is a state-specific function, and the qualification requirements are established by law in each jurisdiction. However, typical requirements can be summarized by the 3 E's: education, experience, exams. Each of these 3 legs of the stool are equally important in the eyes of a licensing board. The first E is college-level education. There are also a handful of states that have an experience-only pathway. Some states are very specific about the name of the degree they will accept. Some states specify individual courses that must be part of an applicant's education. It is very important to check your state-specific requirements and to understand that those requirements may be updated periodically. The second E is work experience under someone practicing geology legally in the jurisdiction in which the work experience is earned. This is typically a licensed geologist, or for work in non-licensed situations, each board will have guidance on how that work is evaluated and credited towards a license application. In the United States, all states with practice authority licensure for geologists utilize the National Association of State Boards of Geology, also known as ASBOG, exams. Each state will accept the results of ASBOG exams administered in other states. While this comity for exam requirements isn't reciprocity as most licensees tend to think about it, it does provide some level of uniformity and professional mobility for license applicants. Some states do have reciprocity agreements with other states when their laws and regulations are consistent enough to be equivalent. Some states, like California, have laws and regulations that are so specific to that jurisdiction that reciprocity agreements with other states are not possible. Having to apply for a separate license in each state where they practice is often the source of irritation or complaints by professional geologists. This is where it's helpful to understand what a license really is. It isn't a convenience for a geologist or a professional society certification to serve as a feather in their cap. It is a way for individual state governments to enforce minimum competency in order to protect the public. Getting back to that third E, or the exams. As I said earlier, in the US, the geology license exams mean the ASBOG Fundamentals of Geology and Practice of Geology exams. Our next 2 presenters will be giving you details of how the exams are developed and how data generated by the Fundamentals of Geology exam can benefit college and university geology programs. There are 2 national exams: the Fundamentals, or FG exam, intended to test bachelor's level knowledge, and the Practice exam, or PG, which is intended to test applied professional tasks. The ASBOG exams are paper and pencil and are administered twice per year in the spring and fall. Each licensed state administers the exams in their state on the same day throughout the US. According to the ASBOG website, only 2 states currently administer a state-specific exam, California and Maine. However, you should always check with your state-specific licensing board for the most up-to-date information regarding the required exams. In California, the Geologist in Training or GIT certificate is an optional step on the path to licensure. It is formal recognition from a state license board that the applicant has passed the first of the required geology license exams and that the holder is entitled to use the protected title of GIT. It is not a license to practice geology. Many states, but not all, offer a GIT certificate, and applicants should check with their state license board to determine if it is a required or optional step where they are located. Because the fundamentals exam focuses on bachelor's level knowledge, it is beneficial to students or recent graduates to take this first exam during their senior year of college or shortly after graduation. When you think about it, a student or recent graduate has just paid thousands of dollars for the world's most expensive exam preparation course. As folks progress in their career, they tend to become more specialized, and they may forget some of the things they learned in school. As Jack Warner will discuss in the presentation following this one, ASBOG data supports the conclusion that the FG exam is harder to pass the longer an examinee has been out of school. So why get a GIT? Well, in addition to being easier to pass the fundamentals exam closer to college graduation, when I talk to employers, every single person I talk to indicates that seeing a GIT certificate listed on a resume gives that job seeker a leg up. Just last week, I was contacted by a PG license applicant who had passed the FG exam in another state but didn't get a GIT certificate. She had recently moved to California and wanted to know how to apply for a GIT certificate here because her new employer wouldn't give her a staff geologist title without it. Think about that. Her employer wouldn't call her a geologist unless she obtained the GIT certificate. And this is even though she had passed the fundamentals exam. And I have already approved her application for a PG license, so she is scheduled to take the ASBOG PG exam and the California specific exam in the spring. This is a very concrete example of the value that many employers place on every step on the pathway to professional geology licensure. With that, I'd like to thank you all for your attention. I hope this 30,000-foot overview of professional geologist licensure has been helpful. We will now open things up for a few questions before the next presentation begins. Also, if you have questions about geology licensure after the conclusion of this webinar, please feel free to contact me via email or telephone.
So Lori, your first question, is licensing of geologists really necessary?
I believe it is. Minimum standards are typical of various professions such as doctors, lawyers, engineers. A lot of people think that a professional society certification is equivalent, but without that ability to enforce legal consequences, a professional society certification just can't support that.
Okay, great. Now, how do you go about navigating obtaining certifications if you're financially not in a place to pay for those courses and exams?
Well, I'm not sure which courses or exams they're talking about, but there's only a handful of states that have an experience-only pathway. And if you're struggling with college costs, I suggest that you contact your financial aid office and see what they can do about that.
Okay, great. Can you clarify a little bit about registration? The question was, in many licensure states, it's used to indicate that a licensee is currently authorized to practice, but a license is not lost through inactivity. Can you speak a little bit more about that?
Most states, I can only speak to California. In California, you're required to renew your license every 2 years. And as long as that license is active, you are legally entitled to practice geology, to do the tasks that make up your profession. If you let your license lapse, you are legally unable to practice geology. And if you do so while your license is lapsed, you will be subject to unlicensed practice fines and consequences.
Okay. Okay, great. That's wonderful information. Now, if you are a recent graduate or early career geoscientist, a lot of times they don't come in with a lot of that experience. So how are they supposed to gain that experience when the requirement is 3 years? Do you have any suggestions for those individuals?
Well, as an unlicensed early career geologist, if you're working in a licensure state, you will be working under somebody licensed or you will be violating the law. So working under an appropriate licensee is how you get your work experience. And excuse me, they will help you document the work that you're doing that meets the definition of geology in your state. For example, in California, a lot of people work in multidisciplinary fields such as environmental consulting or geotechnical consulting. And a lot of applicants, unfortunately, don't seem to understand that there's a legal definition of geology and only work meeting that definition qualifies for licensure. So it's incumbent upon the licensee that you're working under to help explain that to you. And if you aren't sure what the difference is, you should definitely contact your state license board.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Now, what happens if the state that you live in does not have licensure? This individual, the work that he or she does, it covers multiple states, and it's in oil and gas, so there's a focus on different basins. And so what strategy would you employ on determining which state to pursue?
Well, I would pick the state that you do the most work in and contact them about how to document your work in a non-licensed state or a non-licensed situation. That's actually pretty common, and there are certain requirements established by each license board on how to document that. But rest assured, there is a pathway. You aren't wasting, as some people have told me, that experience. That experience is valid. It's just there's a specific way of documenting that, and you should be aware of what those requirements are.
Okay, fantastic. Now, this individual is interested in how various states define public practice of geology in their statutes. So some states, such as Florida, are very vague about their statutes, about what geologists can and can't do, while other states, such as California, are very clear. So is there any idea of how many states may have adopted the ASBOG Model Rules and Regulations definition of public practice of geology?
You know, I don't have that information at my fingertips, but if you feel like emailing me that question, I can take a look at the various statutes and see if I can come up with an answer for you. It's probably been about 3 years since I read through all 32 licensure acts. It's not something that I do often.
You don't have them memorized?
No, I don't. And you know, the key issue is that if you're practicing in Florida and you don't understand what public practice is, you need to contact the state license board because you're putting yourself at risk.
Okay, fantastic. Now, do you know if there's a list of states with reciprocity agreements?
I do not. A later speaker, Randy Kath, who was president of ASBOG, may have that information, but because California doesn't have reciprocity agreements with other states, I don't track that.
Okay, great. Now, are the tests needing to be sequential, or can they be taken all at once if the other requirements and experience or education requirements?
In California, you can take all of the exams at once. You can take them one at a time. You can take them in any order. The fundamentals exam is the only exam that we allow you to take in California before you get your work experience. But if you have the work experience and have applied to take the exams in order to get licensed through our board, you can take the exams any which way you want.
Okay, fantastic. Now, do you know where you can find a list of states that offer a GIT?
There is a list on the ASBOG website. If you pull up asbog.org and go to the left-hand side of the page, there's something, I think it's about halfway down, called the state matrix, and that information should be in there. That's a summary, not a detailed summary, but a summary of which states have various different options for licensure.
Okay, fantastic. Now, how does the board handle work experience towards dual licensure? For example, if you're an engineering geologist working towards a PE and a PG, what are some of the nuances to look for?
That is something that's going to be very, very state specific. In California, there are legal definitions of civil engineering. There's legal definitions of geology. There's legal definitions of engineering geology and geotechnical engineering. As I said earlier in my slides, I was on the witness stand for 2.5 hours yesterday explaining to a judge the difference between geotechnical engineering and engineering geology because I had denied somebody an application for an engineering geology title authority license. And it was because that person had actually been doing geotechnical engineering as defined in the law versus engineering geology as defined in our law. So the key with everything is understanding the definitions in the law and the regulations, because a license board has to stick with those. We can't adjust those. We can't change those without going through a legal process. It's not up to us to be fudgy or wishy-washy or just, say, hey, you're a good guy, you can go ahead and take this exam. We have to be very, very specific about those definitions and enforcing them.
Okay, that makes sense. Great. Now, for those who haven't yet taken the exams, what study aids are available for those who have been out of school for several years?
Well, the first place I would advise people to start is to get on the ASBOG website and go to the candidate handbook. That is a very detailed overview of state licensure requirements in the United States. And at the back of the ASBOG candidate handbook, there are some sample questions for the ASBOG exams. Neither ASBOG or, as far as I know, any state board, I know California doesn't recommend any particular study course. California doesn't offer a study course. There are private contractors that do so. As the registrar in California, I get a lot of feedback from people who have taken the exam, and the overwhelming consensus is that form a study group. Form a study group with either people from school or people from your local professional society. Those people seem to feel that that was the most beneficial way for them to study, is to do that exchange with other people.
Okay, fantastic. Now, we have time for one last question. If you have a master's degree, is the required experience still 5 years?
It depends on your state. You're going to have to check with the specific state that you're talking about. If you are looking to apply in California, please use my email or phone number and contact me, and I can walk you through the requirements here.
Great. Thank you so much, Lori, for all of that information. Next up, I would like to welcome Jack Warner, who will discuss the ASBOG Task Analysis Survey. So, Jack, take it away.
Thank you, Heather. I've had the distinct privilege of assisting ASBOG with their test development activities since 1992, and I look forward to visiting with you about the procedures that are used to develop the national examinations. It's been my experience that the content of academic examinations usually centers on reading assignments and lecture notes. Most questions that appeared in the examinations that I took, at least, could be linked to either assigned textbooks and or lecture notes that I had taken during class. Very seldom was I left thinking, where did this question come from? Let's contrast that with licensure examinations. While the content of the examinations given at colleges and universities is very straightforward, such is not the case with licensing examinations. Let's take geology as an example. Candidates taking the national licensing examinations have attended numerous colleges and universities throughout the country. There are 506 schools that awarded the BA/BS degrees to candidates taking the FG examination from the spring of 2008 through the fall of 2018. The geology courses offered at these schools are different. The courses are taught by different professors, and the professors are using different textbooks. In this world of ambiguity it is that we turn to the task analysis for definition and structure when defining the content and scope of the national licensing examinations. And I'd like to thank Sandy Shank from Delaware and Richard Spruill from North Carolina, who served as co-chairs on the Task Analysis Survey 2015. These gentlemen, they provided excellent guidance during all phases of the task analysis and gave everybody comfort knowing that we were in capable hands. The purpose of the task analysis is to maximize the relevance of the FG and PG examinations to the practice of the geologic profession. And on the slide, you can see that we first of all started off by updating the task analysis 2010 task statements. You can see that this particular type of study has been conducted several times. The 2015 task analysis, very similar, the task statements to the 2010 study, and we'll be talking about that in just a little bit. The survey was mailed to a random sample of 200 licensed registered geologists, geoscientists in each of the participating jurisdictions, which meant we sent out 5,800 surveys in the United States and Canada. They used SurveyMonkey 1,890. Geoscientists were contacted, and finally 2,000 academicians using the AGI directory. They rated the importance of the 43 task statements to the practice of geology as it is applied to public protection. And then the task analysis subcommittee reviewed and evaluated the results in order to define the content and scope of the national examinations. Let's take a few moments to look at the task statements to hopefully give you a greater appreciation of the Task Analysis 2015 results that we will be reviewing in a few minutes. The 43 task statements are distributed among 8 content domains. This particular slide is showing the task statements for the first 2 content domains, general and field geology, and mineralogy, petrology, and geochemistry. Moving on to the 3rd and 4th domains, sedimentology, stratigraphy, and paleontology. Content domain D, geomorphology, superficial processes, and quaternary geology. Moving on to structure, tectonics, and seismology in content domain E. Hydrogeology. Engineering geology, economic and resources geology are the final domains. The respondents rated the importance of each of the 43 tasks based on the following question. Based on your knowledge and experience as a professional geologist, geoscientist, how important is this task to the practice of geology as it is applied to the protection of public health, safety, and well-being? The rating scale is grounded in the purpose of licensure, which is to protect the general public. And the rating scale, as you'll note, ranges from 0, not important, all the way up to 3, extremely important. High return rates are desirable because they increase the likelihood that respondents are representative of the population that is being sampled. As you can see, there were a total of 2,332 out of 5,800 surveys returned from practicing geologists, which gives us a 40% return rate. This high return rate increases the likelihood that respondents truly represent professional geologists from across the United States. There were 399 out of 1,890 surveys returned from practicing geoscientists in Canada. For those of you who are interested in a comparison between practicing geologists in the United States and practicing geoscientists in Canada, I encourage you to read the Task Analysis 2015 summary report that may be found on the homepage of the ASBOG website. Of the 2,000 academicians that were randomly sampled from the AGI directory, a total of 194 were completed and returned. And while this return rate is lower than the 40% return rate for practicing geologists, these results nonetheless provide very useful information regarding how academicians view the practice of the profession. We're looking here at the mean values for all task statements for practicing geologists. And what we have plotted are the mean values from the last two task analysis studies. The Task Analysis 2015 study, the mean values are plotted in red, whereas the Task Analysis 2010 values are plotted in white. And we can make a comparison between these two studies because the task statements were virtually identical in both studies. The most striking aspect of this figure is the high degree of similarity in the results between 2010 and 2015, a correlation of positive 0.98. Tasks that were thought to be important to public protection in 2010 were also thought to be important in 2015. Similarly, tasks that were less important in 2010 remain that way in 2015. Reliability analyses were conducted to assess the degree of similarity in the ratings made by practicing geologists in each state. An alpha coefficient of plus 0.997 indicates an extremely high degree of consistency in the ratings made by practicing geologists across the United States, where 0 indicates no consistency, 1 perfect consistency. This finding is very powerful, for it indicates that the practice of the profession is consistent and that it is possible to develop a uniform national examination that is fair to candidates from all regions of the country. Let's take a look at the views of practicing geologists compared to academia. While the plus 0.86 correlation indicates a high degree of similarity in the ratings between the two groups, there are noticeable differences. For example, academicians rated the task statements in 4 domains higher relative to the practicing geologists. And if you look at the 2nd through the 5th domains that are listed in this particular chart, you'll notice that the green line is significantly higher than the red line. Again, academicians viewed the 43 tasks as more important relative to the practicing geologists, particularly in these domains. Overall, the average mean value for academicians across the 43 task statements was 2.1, which is higher than the 1.81 for practicing geologists in the United States. SMEs, subject matter experts, classified each of the 43 task statements into the FG or PG examination based on whether the tasks were more accurately tested at the FG level, that is with no requisite experience, the PG level with a minimum of 4 or 5 years of experience, or both. And based upon these classifications, 30 of the 43 tasks are tested in the FG examination, while 33 of the 43 tasks are tested in the FPG examinations. And the mean values for each of these 43 task statements determined the weight to be assigned to each task. On the FG examination, task weights were determined using the ratings made by practicing geologists and academia, giving equal weight to both groups. By contrast, the PG task weights were calculated using only those ratings made by practicing geologists. This chart shows the FG test blueprint, which is based on the ratings made by practicing geologists and academia. I would like to mention that each of the content domains listed in the test blueprint is also accompanied by a knowledge base that is needed in order to perform the tasks. The knowledge base for each domain may be found in the candidate handbook that Lori referenced earlier in her presentation, as well as the Task Analysis 2015 summary report that's located on the ASBOG website. Lori mentioned the candidate handbook that is available to candidates. It's a wonderful document. It addresses a variety of issues that candidates can use in preparing for the examination, including the test blueprints and sample questions. The idea is to take out any mystery as to what to expect on the day of the examination, thereby reducing candidates' test anxiety. Reducing candidates' test anxiety also increases the accuracy of the test scores. This chart shows the PG test blueprint, which is based exclusively on ratings made by practicing geologists. Before moving on, I would like to briefly mention that the Task Analysis 2015 also included a section on ethics issues encountered by geologists, and Professor John Williams from California has been actively involved with these types of issues, and I encourage you to look at the Task Analysis report that may be found on the ASBOG website, because that particular report does describe the results from the ethics section of the task analysis survey. There have been hundreds of geologists through the years that have volunteered their time serving as subject matter experts, SMEs, on the Council of Examiners, the COE. They supply the expertise that is essential in developing high-quality exams. Their sole mission: to maximize the quality and fairness of the FG and PG examinations. They meet twice each year, shortly after the exams are administered. After an orientation that addresses principles for evaluating test questions, the subject matter experts review and evaluate the statistical results from the examinations. They review candidates' comments, comments that candidates make on the day of the examination on an anonymous form that they can fill out if they so choose. And they finalize the scoring keys based on an evaluation of the statistical information as well as candidate comments. They also write and review new questions for inclusion into the item banks and review and finalize the upcoming forms of the examination. A lot happens during these two-day workshops. We're looking at the criteria that subject matter experts use when evaluating test items. Questions are either revised or deleted from the item banks if they do not meet each of the criteria listed in this slide. Each question is subjected to multiple reviews before it can be included and scored in an examination as depicted in this slide. The subject matter expert that writes an item documents why the correct answer is correct and why each distractor is incorrect. And this type of documentation has been found to be very useful by the geologists that are part of the Council of Examiners during reviews of test questions and examination questions during the workshops. And this documentation is also very critical in the event of a legal challenge to the examination. Bottom line, examination accuracy is enhanced because substandard items are detected during the review process and are not scored. Candidate scores are not influenced by these problematic items that are detected from time to time. The statistical evaluation of test items is very useful in flagging questions for in-depth review by the Council of Examiners. An item can be flagged because it is extremely difficult or because the item exhibits a negative correlation with the total test score. Subject matter experts are able to make determinations on whether to score an item, perhaps double key an item, A and B, for example. They can do this based on the content of the item, candidates' comments, and then the statistical evaluation of the item. These decisions made by the Council of Examiners are designed to improve the accuracy of the scores and are made before scores are mailed to candidates. Questions that have problems are either thrown out, that is not scored, or double keyed, and do not impact candidates' final scores. The percent of items that are not scored or double keyed is very low, approximately 1 to 2%. Yet these changes can have an impact on some candidates' final scores, particularly those candidates who are at or near the cutoff score on the examination. The passing scores on the FG and PG examinations reflect minimum competency and are determined using a criterion reference procedure. COE members evaluate the difficulty levels of the examination items in relation to minimum competency, and these ratings are used to establish cutoff scores that reflect minimum competency. The passing scores are adjusted based on the statistical equating of test forms, so that candidates have approximately the same probability of passing any version of the examinations. While the cutoff scores are set using a criterion reference procedure, I would like to briefly mention that there are circumstances where norm reference test scores can be useful. For example, Randy Kath will be speaking to you later about the Curriculum Performance Assessment Tool, CPAT, used to provide feedback to colleges and universities on the performance levels of their students. The CPAT data, which Randy will be addressing, are based on norm reference procedures where candidates are compared to one another. The norm reference procedure is very useful to those colleges and universities that are interested in comparing their students against a national standard of all BA, BS candidates taking the FG examination. This chart shows candidate volume by year, starting in 1992 and going through 2018. There were only a handful of states that required licensure in 1992, and the number of states requiring licensure has increased steadily through the years. You can see there was a sharp decline following in the volume following the 2008 recession. However, candidate volume has increased in recent years, particularly with the FG examination. This chart shows the estimated reliabilities for the FG and PG examinations from March 2008 through October 2018. Reliability refers to the consistency or precision of measurement that a test provides. The index ranges from 0 to 1, where 0.70 and above is generally considered acceptable according to testing standards. This reliability coefficient will be higher for exams that contain more questions, and this explains why the FG reliability coefficients are higher than the PG reliability coefficients, with the FG examination containing 140 questions compared to only 110 on the practice examination. This chart shows passing rates for first-time candidates versus all candidates taking the examinations from March 2008 through October 2018. For each administration for both examinations, candidates taking the exam for the first time passed at higher rates compared to all candidates taking the examinations. This chart shows the passing rate by number of attempts at the FG examination from March 2008 through October 2018. And you can see that overall 62% of the candidates passed the FG examination, as evidenced by the black bar on the right. However, 70% of the candidates taking the examination for the first time passed. The odds of passing the examination go down as the number of attempts go up. A similar pattern is observed with the PG examination. Overall, 73% of the candidates passed the PG examination. However, 81% of the candidates taking the examination for the first time pass. As with the FG examination, the odds of passing the examination go down as the number of attempts go up. This chart shows FG passing rates by highest degree in the geological sciences using data from March 2008 through October 2018. Overall, 62% of the candidates passed the FG exam during this time period. Many states allow candidates to take the FG examination in their senior year prior to receiving the BA or BS degree, and this explains why there are 623 FG candidates that indicated no degree. The substantial difference in passing rates between candidates with the BA, BS degree and candidates with advanced degrees makes it clear that advanced degrees and academic experience play a very powerful role in candidates' performance on the FG examination. The CPAT data that Randy's going to be talking about in just a few minutes are based on national norms using only those candidates that listed the BA or BS as their highest degree, not candidates with advanced degrees. This chart shows the PG passing rate by the highest degree in the geological sciences. Overall, 73% of the candidates passed the PG examination during this time period, as with the FG examination, candidates with advanced degrees passed at higher rates than candidates with the BA or BS degree. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today, and I look forward to answering any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Jack. And we do have several questions that have come in from the audience. The first one, earlier you mentioned that the results from the task analysis survey in 2015 were very similar to the one in 2010. Do you anticipate any changes when the next task analysis study is going to be conducted?
Well, Heather, that's an excellent question, and I cannot wait to crunch the numbers. We don't know at this point. I don't anticipate any major changes, but certainly looking forward to analyzing the data from the next task analysis study to see whether or not there are any changes in the practice of the profession during the last 5 to 7 years.
Considering most professional geologist licenses require degrees, how do you plan to increase the response rate by educators for the task analysis?
Yeah, that's really an interesting question. We hope that the next time this particular task analysis is conducted, that academicians will more readily complete the questionnaire. We're planning to go online and administer this survey using Google Forms, I believe, and so it should be easier to complete than it was back in 2015. And if we have any academicians that are listening that happen to get this particular survey in the mail down the road here, please fill it out. It's really important.
Great, thank you. Now, which 3 states didn't return any response? We saw that 32 states require a license, but 29 states had responses.
I would have to look at that. I believe on this particular study, it turned out that Puerto Rico did not participate in the study, and there was one other jurisdiction. Offhand, I don't have that in front of me.
Yeah, Jack, this is Randy. And if
Yes.
you remember, Louisiana and New York came online after the 2015 task. So those are the other 2 states.
Excellent. Thank you, Randy.
Great, thank you for jumping in there. Now, are the subjects that are rated higher in importance more likely to have more questions on the exams than those with lower ratings?
Precisely. That's exactly how that works. The higher the mean value on a particular task, the more questions that will be devoted to that task.
Okay, great. Now, do all the 8 domains in the task analysis survey correlate to basic geology courses taught in all universities and colleges?
I might leave that to Randy to address, but I believe that is the case.
Okay.
Yeah, Heather, this is Randy. And those 8 content domains are pretty fundamental for most undergraduate degree programs, with one exception would be engineering geology. Not all universities teach an engineering geology course, but if you're going to use the fundamentals for assessment, you would just ignore the results from the engineering domain.
Okay, fantastic. Most departments don't teach engineering geology or economic geology. So, like you just mentioned, are there resources on the ASBOG page to find basic materials or references to books or texts so you could read and learn about it on your own?
The candidate handbook does have some pretty good information that I would certainly go to if I were a student preparing to take the examination. I'm referring specifically to the knowledge base, and you could go through the knowledge base that's listed in the candidate handbook. And for those knowledge statements where you haven't been exposed to in your undergraduate curriculum, you might want to pick up textbooks that address those particular issues in order to feel competent in all domains that are covered on the examination.
Okay, fantastic. Now, what is a passing percentage score?
A passing percentage score. Well, there's so many ways to talk about the examination scores. The number of answers correct would be a raw score. The percent correct score would be the percent of questions that a candidate answered correctly. The minimum passing score is always scaled to 70. So when you receive a scaled score of 70, that means you hit that minimum competency point. You just barely pass the examination. And a scaled score of 100 is equal to a perfect score. A scaled score of 69 is the highest failing score that a candidate can receive. And of course, a 0 means that you didn't answer any of the questions correct.
Okay. Now, if a question is thrown out, do those who answered it correctly still get credit for it?
No. If a question is thrown out, what this means is that the Council of Examiners has determined that there really is no correct answer, and it is a flawed question. So that particular question that is flawed is not considered for any candidates.
Okay, fantastic. Now, how many times can an exam be retaken, if at all?
The ASBOG doesn't care how many times an examination, a candidate takes an examination. However, there are perhaps a few boards, state boards, that will look at the number of times a candidate has taken an examination, and I'm aware of some situations in other professions where they might require a candidate to go back and take some coursework before sitting for the examination. But as far as ASBOG is concerned, a candidate could take the examination 100 times, and it would not be a problem.
Great, thank you. Now, this individual took and passed the FG and PG exams in March of 2017, but NYS only provided a pass-fail. Is there any way to obtain an actual grade?
You would probably want to contact Dina Sneed, who is the executive director of ASBOG, and she could probably help you with that.
Okay, great, thank you. Can additional time be granted for candidates to generate comments on test questions? When this individual took the exams, he or she had several comments to specific questions, but didn't have time to submit the comments. What would you suggest for that?
Well, when putting together both examinations, the Council of Examiners looked at the complexity of the questions and the time period, 4-hour testing period, plus they considered the extra time it would take for candidates to complete a comment form detailing issues that they might have with particular questions. And it was determined that the 4-hour time period would be sufficient for most, if not all applicants, to complete the questions in the examination and also make comments on the examination. One thing that I would like to mention relative to the comments that we have received from candidates through the years is I do not recall one comment ever indicating from candidates that they did not have sufficient time to complete the examinations. They're specifically developed as what we refer to as power-based examinations, meaning that most, if not all, candidates should have ample time to complete all questions in the examination.
Great, thank you. That is all the time we have for this particular question and answer session. Now I would like to welcome Randy Kath, who will talk about using the ASBOG Fundamentals of Geology exam as an assessment tool for geoscience programs. So Randy, take it away whenever you're ready.
Okay, well, thank you, Heather, and good afternoon, participants on the East Coast, and good morning to participants on the West Coast. Being the last speaker for today's webinar, I'd like to thank AGI for hosting this webinar. Most importantly, I'd like to thank all our participants for taking the time out of your important schedules to view this webinar. So during the first presentation, Lori gave us a good summary of the difference between registration, certification, and licensure, and why it's important to be licensed. During Jack's presentation, we got a good summary of how the scope and content of the exams are determined using the task analysis survey, and a quick overview of the statistical validity of the exams. So during this third and final presentation, I'd like to summarize how the fundamentals of geology exam can be used for undergraduate program review, academic assessment, and to evaluate how your department's geoscience courses are preparing your undergraduates for the public practice of the profession of geology. Before we get into the details of using the fundamentals exam for assessment, I thought it'd be a good idea to give an overview of the development of ASBOG's academic assessment program. You notice on a lot of Jack's slides that he went from 2008 to 2018. So starting in 2008, a special committee on education and outreach was formed with the primary purpose of using the fundamentals of geology exam for academic assessment. Based on an evaluation of data sets from 1992 to 2007, the committee realized that critical demographic data was not being collected, which was necessary for any academic assessment. So to rectify this, there were several modifications made to the fundamentals of geology answer sheet to collect the important demographic data, including the AGI code and graduation year. And that's why most of the graphs that you'll see start with 2008. And so after collecting several years of demographic data, an assessment letter was sent out to the different geoscience departments. Many participants on today's webinar may have received a copy of this letter. This assessment letter contained a percentile graph that showed the 8 content domains plotted by graduation year. Unfortunately, the task statements that Jack covered in his presentations were not included in the letter, and there was also a suggestion that there would be a fee to access these data sets. And given the fee portion of it, my guess is that many of these assessment letters went to the circular file cabinet on the floor. So starting in 2012, ASBOG developed the Curriculum Performance Assessment Tool, CPAT for short, to streamline the statistical processing of assessment data for comparison to this national data set. So currently we have 217 universities approximately 68% have a BS degree. Also, many ASBOG states and one non-ASBOG state allows candidates to take the FG exam prior to graduation. So the percentage of no degree candidates shown in blue represents a population that's been increasing over the last few years as institutions in Arkansas, Delaware, Georgia, Michigan, and Texas, to name a few, have been using CPAT for program assessment. For all of us in the university system, approximately every 5 years, we undergo program review for accreditation. During this process, we're asked to provide assessment data that we've collected mostly through subjective techniques. Using the fundamental geology exam for program review is an objective method where our students can be compared to a national standard, as Jack was saying. And here at the University of West Georgia, we've used this assessment data for our SACS review. You can also use this data from the fundamentals for curriculum development, assessment, and modification. And hopefully, if I have time at the end of the presentation, I'll show how our department used the assessment data to make a significant program modification to better prepare our students to become practicing geologists. This is the same slide Jack showed during his presentation. These show the 8 content domains and the percentage of each domain that's on the current fundamentals exam. I think, as you can see, these domains cover the fundamental concepts in geology that undergraduates are exposed to through their educational experiences. And in a prior question, we were asked if all content domains are taught in the university undergraduate curriculum. And for the most part, they are. And economic geology may not, engineering may not. But it's important for the students taking the examinations to know that you don't have to pass every content domain to pass the examination. So currently, there are 32 member states, ASBOG member states shown in green, that allow the candidates to apply for and take the FG exam. And additionally, thanks to the hard work and dedication of Larry Lemke, the department chair at Central Michigan University, CMU is administering the FG exam so that departments in Michigan can use CPAT for assessment. So just for the record, candidates applying to take the fundamentals exam at Central Michigan undergo the same rigorous admission standards as the 32 member states. Because of this, students that pass the FG exam can apply in any one of the green states there to take the PG exam after they meet experience requirements and eventually become licensed. So there is transferability of the exam scores. At about the next 15 slides or so, the next 15 slides, I'm going to give you a virtual demonstration of CPAT. So this is first slide here. This is the main CPAT menu. It's mostly used at the administrative level for importing examination data. The examination data are updated twice a year after each administration of the exam. So this master CPAT database allows selection of any AGI code for institutional assessment as long as you're one of the 217 universities in the database. So for those faculty members listening in today, if you'd like to request information, shoot me an email, and my email will be at the very last slide, and I'll see if you have institutional data and I can provide you with a CPAT report. So the institutional data that we supply will only be for your program. ASBOG will not release any data for comparison of different programs. And for the CPAT demonstration that we're going through today, I've made a fictitious university, Chimney Rock University. So we select Chimney Rock from our main master menu, and we get this screen, which allows us to get many statistical options for presenting the assessment data. Most of us are familiar with z-scores and percentiles, and for today's demonstration, we'll look specifically at z-scores, scaled score versus percent correct, and percent passing by degree year, all these shown in the green boxes. So at first, we'll look at z-scores. This slide shows a z-score directly from the CPAT application. And z-scores represent the number of standard deviations above or below the national standard for your school. The z-scores are organized into the 8 content domains that we've discussed and are grouped by graduation year. The grouping by graduation year is important, so if you're assessing your curriculum and you've had faculty come and go or you've made changes, you can make that assessment. And if you remember, z-scores can be directly correlated with percentiles. A z-score of 0 would be the 50th percentile. A z-score of +3 would be the 100th percentile, and the z-score of -3 would be the 0 percentile. So this slide here shows how we can interpret the z-scores, and I'd like to thank Wayne Hamilton. This is a slide I stole from him. He presented at GSA for the annual meeting last year, using the FG for assessment for a university in Texas. Hopefully Wayne's online with us today. But in general, if you're plus or minus about 1/4 of a standard deviation from the national mean, your students are performing very well. If your content domain score has a z-score less than negative 0.25, your students are probably performing slightly below an accepted margin. So in this particular example, students are doing acceptable in mineralogy, sedimentology, general and field geology, and economic geology. In the hydrogeology domain in yellow, we're slightly below the negative 0.25. So we're very close to what would be acceptable. But for the domain shown in the red box, the students at this institution or your institution would be performing below an acceptable margin. Jack had presented some information regarding scaled score versus percent correct, and this is always a confusion that candidates have. This is just from the fictitious Chimney Rock University, and on the left-hand side is the scaled score, and in the bottom we have percent correct. Candidates need to receive a scaled score of 70 to pass the examination for licensure. This defines minimum competency. So a scaled score of 70 for Chimney Rock corresponds to a 60% correct score. So I think for all the faculty listening in today, I think if you told your students that all they needed to do to pass your class was get 60% correct, that'd be a pretty low bar for them to achieve. Okay. Next slide. Many of us like to also look at an overall passing rate for our students, and that's shown here. This graph provides a summary of the passing rates and a number of test takers. And again, these are domained by graduation year. So I'm going to switch back to the main CPAT menu again. And the next part of this virtual demonstration, we'll look at the domain-specific statistical plots that we can look at. So we'll click that button where the green box is, and we get this menu. And on this menu, there's a drop-down dialog box that allows users to select one of the 8 content domains. And so here are the 8 content domains that we can select. And so in this next example, we'll be looking at domain A, general and field geology for Chimney Rock. So in the general and field geology, we have a bunch of different plots we can make using the CPAT app. And this is the normalized ratio plot that shows whether Chimney Rock University students plot above or below the national average. The national average would be the 0 line. Also shown on this plot are the N values, again, for each graduation year that are binned along the x-axis. Okay, a few options I didn't point out on the previous panel is that there's a series of radio buttons on the left side of the CPAT panel here, and we can select only first-time test takers or multiple test takers, and we can separate no degree, so our graduating seniors, from our degreed candidates. And for this example, we'll again look at the normalized ratio score. And because we selected first-time test taker radio button in this example, the normalized ratio plot for field and general geology has now been modified based on the updated parameters in the query. So we'll switch again, and so finally, ASBOG can provide aggregate data for your institution by selecting the report menu. Aggregate data can be viewed and printed, and here's an example of some aggregate data for Chimney Rock University. And these types of data are available for export from the CPAT application. Please note that student ID is not populated. It's populated with a random number. ASBOG does not report candidate names in the aggregate data. Also, you'll see the second column in the data report shows the primary practice of the candidate, and this is what the candidates select on their bubble sheet. And the last 3 columns in the aggregate data are the number correct, so how many they got correct on the examination, the percent correct, and their scaled score, respectively, on that right-hand column. So in the last few minutes I have here, I'll switch gears just a little bit and show you how the University of West Georgia used CPAT data for assessment. In 1997, the University of West Georgia went through quarter to semester conversion, and as part of this conversion, several courses were dropped from our curriculum, including economic geology. We started looking at this assessment data, and we noticed that after 1997, our students were performing below the national average. So we got together and we started talking with the faculty, and we also said, well, hydrogeology and engineering geology are electives at our institution. So given this, students graduating from the University of West Georgia could actually get out with a degree without 3 of the major content domains. So in 2014, we made a change and we decided to bring economic geology back into our curriculum, and we made this required. We also made hydrogeology a required course instead of an elective course, and we have engineering geology, which is taught every other year, and we try to get all of our students to take engineering geology. We also modified our mineralogy course and our geomorph and our field course to be better integrated with our other courses. So we made this change in January 15, and after we had our students take the fundamentals of geology exam, we noticed an improvement immediately in economic geology and hydrogeology. Our candidates started performing above the national average. So this is a very sensitive assessment tool. So if you make minor modifications to your curriculum, you'll see those in your assessment data fairly quickly. Last couple slides here, talk a little bit about Central Michigan University. And again, I have to thank Larry Lemke for being so persistent with this. And I've seen a few questions coming in asking, how do we get a license if our university, or sorry, if our state does not have licensure? Well, for the non-member states, I think the CMU model is perfect. So Central Michigan University petitioned the ASBOG Executive Committee and wanted to use the fundamentals of geology as an assessment tool. And they were granted this. And they were granted this because the Central Michigan and the state of Michigan are not issuing a license, and they will not be used in the PG examination. So this is purely 100% for assessment. But because the criteria to take the exam is similar to the criteria in the 32 member states, the exam scores can be transferred to any of those 32 member states. The other thing that this opened up with this CMU model and for specific member states is many of the states have we don't have a lot of testing agencies, and so you have to travel all over the state to go to the one testing agency. So we're starting to look at how can we use university testing facilities to administer the fundamentals of geology so that we'll have a broader geographic distribution within the state. With that, I'll end up, and if you have any questions, I'd love to answer them. If you would like to contact me specifically, here's my contact information. Feel free to call or email. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Randy. And of course, with this large of an audience, we definitely have some questions coming in. The first one asks that this person's state does not have professional licensure, so can they still use the FG for an assessment tool?
Absolutely. It will take a little bit of work, and Central Michigan has already set precedent for this. So the state or the university that wants to use it for assessment would have to contact ASBOG and go through the process of getting the executive committee to approve that university to administer the examination.
Great. Now, there was a question about Alaska specifically. Here, why is Alaska shown as a non-regulatory state when they do have a geology certification program based upon AIPG certification criteria? So shouldn't they be in their own category?
No, and I think that Lori covered this quite well in her presentation. Certification is completely different than licensure. So Alaska does not have licensure. Colorado is very similar. They will accept AIPG certification, but AIP certification is not a license. It is not a state regulated license.
Okay, Lori, would you like to add anything to that?
Actually, I think Randy just answered it perfectly.
Okay, great. I thought I'd give you the opportunity just in case. So is it possible for a university in a state that does not require the license to administer the FG exam to obtain these scores and evaluate their program?
Yeah, if we have the scores, and many times you may do your undergraduate degree, let's say you go to the University of Colorado and get a degree in geology, but then you go to a state like Georgia and you decide you want to get licensed, so you sit for the examination. And when you fill out your AGI code, you select the University of Colorado's AGI code. So that then goes into the CPAT database, so we can look at the University of Colorado's curriculum and see how they're performing to this national data set. The key is we need a minimum number of examinations in the CPAT database to make it statistically significant, so the information is useful for program assessment.
Okay, I understand. Now, it seems that each year the primary topic of ASBOG exams changes, even though the candidate handbook has specific percentages of topics covered. Now, how can ASBOG serve as a standardization tool when it's not quite standardized in its topics?
Not sure I understand that question. The 43 task statements that Jack talked about, that the results from the task analysis survey drive the scope and content of the examinations. So the percentage of each one of those pies of the 8 content domains, those only change after a task analysis survey has been completed and analyzed. So typically we're on a 5-year cycle or 5 to 7 year cycle. So those percentages will stay the same during that entire cycle between 2 task surveys.
That's exactly correct, Randy.
Thank you, Jack. Now, you mentioned hydrogeology. Are there any other required courses to qualify for licensure or to be approved to take the exam?
Well, it's as Lori said, that the requirements to sit for the exams are pretty much state specific, but a lot of the states have used the ASBOG model law. And in the model law, it says that you need to have a degree in geology, engineering geology, or geological engineering. So basically, if you have a degree in some geoscience field, typically those 3 fields, the specific ones, you meet the requirements to sit for the fundamentals of geology exam.
Okay. Now, there's a question here about prerequisites. This individual has noticed that many geology programs have become more lax on their required prerequisite courses, particularly with respect to requirements for 2 semesters of chemistry, physics, calculus, for example. What is the consensus on whether 2 semesters of chemistry, physics, and calculus should be required for a geology degree?
Well, I think that is treading on the academic freedoms of the university, but I can give you my opinion. I think geology is a multidisciplinary science, and I think you should have a minimum of at least an introductory chemistry class and an introductory calculus class. And if you're planning on going on to graduate school, it's required that you take a second chemistry and a second calculus. So I personally think that it's important that you take those, and I would also recommend you take statistics because we use a lot of geostatistics in the profession.
Okay, wonderful. Now, where can the CPAT data be accessed, and is it available to the public or only to faculty of participating universities?
Yeah, currently the CPAT data resides between myself and Jack, and so if you want CPAT data, you can send me a request and I'll see if the data are available, and if they are, I'll send you an email packet. Right now, ASBOG is currently working with AGI to get this to be an online accessible database, and the plan would be hopefully this year to get that online, and then each department chair would have a username and password and be able to access that information on demand. And then we would update those data sets twice a year after we have the spring administration of the examination and the fall administration of the examination.
Okay, thank you. At this time, I'd like to open up the floor to any questions for any of our speakers. We haven't heard from Lori and Jack in a little while, and so we'd like to open up the opportunity to ask more questions that we may not have been able to cover earlier in this webinar. We do have one that just came in, and it asks, in general, are state boards able to discipline a state licensed geologist who breaches the code of ethics while working on a project located outside of the US? For example, like working on a project in Mexico. And what advice would you give to geologists wanting to, oh, never mind. That was the end of that question.
Well, this is Lori, and in general, since this specifically mentions California, California doesn't have a code of ethics. Ethics is a voluntary standard. In our regulations, we have what's called the Professional Code of Conduct, and those are measurable standards that we can enforce legally. California doesn't have a jurisdiction of a licensee doing something outside of our borders. However, we do get reports of a licensee who's been convicted in another state or perhaps convicted of a federal crime, say falsifying data for a mine valuation or some such thing like that. And if that information is reported to us, then our enforcement unit can consult with the attorneys and find out what our options are for disciplining the geologist in our state and how it will affect their license in California. So this is a very complex topic, and if you do feel that somebody has done something that would violate the requirements of their California license, you should contact our enforcement unit and discuss the situation with them.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lori. Now, why aren't there more specialized PG exams like what the engineers have?
I'll take that one. It's a matter of sheer numbers and what's important to that particular state. For example, in California at our board, we have 110 to 115,000 licensees. Of those, 50,000 are civil engineers, 4,000 are land surveyors, and 5,100 are geologists. The remainder are various other types of engineers. So from a pure numbers standpoint, at least in California, geologists are about 10% of the licensees when compared to civil engineering, for example. And it's a matter of sheer numbers. These exams cost money, and they require people to come in and help us write them. So I believe only California, Oregon, and Washington offer the specialties. In California, they're just a title. They don't confer any additional practice authority. They just allow you to use a title. That's different in Washington and Oregon. And so my guess is that most states don't feel that they're needed. And it's also a very expensive undertaking.
Yeah, and if I could interject also, when I showed you the aggregate data coming from CPAT, the second column listed the candidate's perceived area of practice. And Jack, you can jump in on this, but there's been several studies statistical studies that Jack has done. And one of the reasons that we collect that information was we wanted to make an assessment whether there was a need for specialty exams or whether the practice exam covered all the specialties. So Jack, could you elaborate a little bit?
Well, yes, we have conducted studies periodically that look at the performance levels of geologists with different backgrounds. And it's really comforting to see that we have high passing rates from geologists from all kinds of backgrounds. So it seems to be a balanced examination where you have reasonably high passing rates on the PG examination, regardless of what your specialty area is.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We have time for one more quick question, and that is, how do you evaluate the content domain when the question clearly could be rated in 2 or more domains?
Jack, you want to take that? Or you want me to take that?
Well, I'll give it my shot here, Randy, and you can follow up. It is the case that occasionally you'll find questions, particularly on the practice examination, that can be categorized into more than one domain. But what we do is we have a primary task classification and a secondary task classification, and the subject matter experts put the priority classification, put the item into the major domain where the major task classification occurs. And yes, it may be secondarily classified in another domain. This doesn't happen very often on the fundamentals exam, occasionally on the practice exam. Randy, do you have any follow-up on that?
Yeah, I was just going to say one follow-up, and there was a question about if your university doesn't teach economic geology. And so much of economic geology, especially mineral resources, is tied directly to mineralogy. So a lot of that you can get in your mineralogy class. And so some of the questions on the fundamentals can be either in the mineralogy domain or the economic geology domain. So they're subdomained, if you will, so they can cross over the two domains.
Great, fantastic. Thank you so much. So this concludes today's webinar. So that will be coming up. And if you have any questions that were not addressed, so I'd like to thank Lori, Jack, and Randy again for sharing your time, your expertise, and your insight with us today. And thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing